Enjoy the ride with Crystal Petrie Consulting.
Hello, my name is Crystal Petrie. Welcome to another episode of my podcast, 60 Minutes With. Today we are going to learn all about the Aztec culture, where they're from, what language they speak, and all other information about them. And here to educate, especially me and you, we have Gonzalo Alvarez. So how are you?
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm good. I'm excited to just let you know all about this culture. I spent, about the last 5 years, 6 years, just learning everything about it. Because it's, as a Mexican American, that's my roots.
Mm-hmm. Now, so you are Mexican American, and the Aztecs, is that your heritage?
So the Aztecs are the mother culture to the modern Mexican culture.
Okay.
So if you want to start, Aztec is a word to refer to a specific group of people in central Mexico that were Nahuatl. Nahuatl was their name.
Okay.
So how you have different tribes.
Right.
So the Nahuatl was particularly what they called themselves. And to this day, there are still Nahuatl people.
Really? Are they still in the same place in central Mexico?
So a lot of them are still in central Mexico. There's over 1 million people who still speak Nahuatl. Nahuatl being the native language that the Nahuatl people spoke. Nahuatl is in English, it's in Spanish. You use Nahuatl every day and you don't even realize it.
What's the English word that we use?
Chocolate, which is chocolate.
Yes.
Tomate, which is tomato.
Really?
Coyote, which is coyote, and so many more. And so that's kind of what started it in the first place. My interest in it was we use these words every day, and again, as Mexican American, I speak Spanish as my first language. My parents, lots of the food we eat, the culture that we have in modern day Mexico, and the words in Spanish that we use come from our ancestral Aztec culture.
So Gonzalo, did your family educate you about Aztec?
No, not at all. My
Okay.
family are from Michoacan, from Mexico, Michoacan, and they immigrated to the United States about 30 years ago, basically, and then I was born. So they lived their entire life in Mexico. Growing up, they didn't really know much about it, and mainly because of the educational system, not really teaching a lot about it. And so really I've taught them more, and they start realizing, oh wow, a lot of the things I do are, from Aztec culture. And so it's been an interesting journey teaching them about things, that they do every day that they didn't realize was part of our native culture.
So what sparked this curiosity in you? Did somebody say something? Did you watch a show?
So what sparked this curiosity in me was really I started making a comic in college called Pollo Man, which is basically the beginnings of what would become this book. And it was like a Mexican fantasy. And the reason was I was like, why isn't there a Mexican fantasy book or show or video game, right? It's all set in Europe with armor and swords, but it's like in Mexico we had our own medieval culture that we just don't know about. But I started realizing a lot of the Mexican culture that we have, like sombreros and these stereotypes of Mexican culture, are actually Hispanic culture.
Okay.
The Spanish, we spoke a different language. That was Nahuatl. Why do we speak Spanish? Well, there's this thing called colonization, which is when another culture comes into a different area and tries to erase the culture that exists there to make theirs the prominent one. So basically, that kind of led me to I could call myself Mexican, but where does that word come from? Mexican comes from the Mexica. The Mexica were the people who migrated from Aztlan, which is said to be somewhere in the southwest U.S. Prior to the U.S. even forming, migrated to central Mexico. There was already people there, so they also kind of colonized and went there. But the Mexica would build Tenochtitlan, which would then become Mexico City. So the Mexica is where we get the word Mexican. That's why, because we're named after our native tribe that went there. So that kind of led me into that direction, was like, I can't really consider myself Mexican if I don't even know the origin of that word.
Right. Okay, and I apologize if any of my questions are offensive,
Not at
because
all.
I really don't know anything about the Aztec culture. So you stated that the Spanish came in and colonized the Mexicans, but so that's not the same thing?
No.
Because, I mean, in
They're
the U.S.
across the sea.
Okay.
The Spanish came from across the sea,
Yes.
from Spain,
Uh-huh.
from the Iberian Peninsula. The Iberian people look much like me, kind of hair Hispanic. But if you look at my father's very dark, more Native American. A lot of people don't realize Native Americans across Canada to South America are all the same people. So Mexican people are just a native group of Mexico, but then the Cherokee, the Iroquois, they were native people, but they were just in a different ethnic group. They just had a different culture, but the same people. Just like, in Africa, there's different tribes,
Yes.
same people, different cultures.
Yes.
And so, I mean, long story short, there's hundreds and hundreds of years of history prior to 1521 when the Spanish came. And that kind of changed the world that we are in today.
I know for me, and maybe for you too, whenever people speak about like Mexican people or Hispanic people or Spanish, it seems like they use the word interchangeably, like they're all the same.
And that is a problem of the colonization that happened, and also of the dysphoria that we Mexicans have as who are we? Because majority of Mexican people are mixed, right? We are one of the first mixed races. Before the Europeans from Britain landed in Plymouth, in 1607, there was Spanish who landed in Mexico in 1521. So there was 100 years of history of European contact before the United States, before anyone landed in the United States. So it comes from colonization, it comes from a lack of understanding of our history, and it comes because the Spanish, when they took over, Mexico was called New Spain for 200-300 years.
Wow.
Before Mexicans fought back in the Mexican Revolution in 1830. That's when we kicked the Spanish out and became our own independent country. But yeah, it was called New Spain. And under the rule of New Spain, if you were, half Mexican and half European, you were lesser in the class system. If you were full Spanish, you were higher in the class system. And then if you were black and native, you were at the lowest. And so a lot of those words that we use interchangeably about like Hispanic, mestizo is kind of the word that's used in Spanish to talk about someone who's mixed. Mestizo meaning mixed. But that comes from that class system.
Yes.
A mestizo was actually a lower class citizen because of their race mix. And so, so for me, I am Hispanic, I am Latino, I am all these words, but it's almost like different umbrella terms. But I really consider myself Mexican. Mexican, my parents are from Mexico. We have Mexican culture. I'll consider myself Hispanic and Latino for census and all that other stuff, but in reality, they left out the native side. Only recently has the census allowed you to put in that you're native Aztec, native Maya.
Really?
Native, yes, only recently. So
Yeah.
majority of Mexican people, even people who are just very clearly more native, still under the census have to apply as white or Hispanic. And that just comes from, the powers that be trying to, make everyone sort of like the same.
Right.
And to oppress native culture.
Yes,
that's been
it
a
is.
problem that's, been present since European, colonization.
And you know what I think of as you're talking about that census? How many generations of people were not accurately counted
Exactly.
because they just didn't see themselves on that?
In the census, exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. And so that's kind of what led my journey again is just I want to be able to teach people through my projects. I want that 9-year-old Mexican kid who grew up not understanding, well, why do my parents speak Spanish? Why does my mom look so white and my dad look so brown? Why do people, think certain things about me because I'm Mexican? And all these stereotypes that you grow up with, in the United States. Understanding that as an adult has given me, power and sort of love for myself, because now I know who I am.
Oh, wow.
No one can tell me who I am or what I am, because I know now. I've read all about it and I'm proud of it.
Yes.
And I want to share it.
That is amazing. I love that you said that. So I have 2 follow-up questions to that. So my first one is, as you were doing the self-discovery and learning about the Aztec culture, did you feel upset where you sat learning about the colonization and what the Spanish did to your culture at that time?
Oh, 100%. I was very upset. And it's one of those things that you have to, understand that a lot of things happened in the past. So generally, I found that it's not good to be upset about the past. And it's better to use that energy to change the future and to change the present. But of course, it is, sad to see that because of that 500 years of colonization, our culture, the native side of our culture has been, diminished or has been, demonized even, paganized. Everyone sees it, even within the Mexican culture. Catholicism is the 70% of Mexico's Catholic.
Yes, it is.
Prior to Catholic people coming, or the religion even existing here, it was 100% native Teoc. So Teoc is the sort of the god, the spirit, the energy that native people worship, honor. Teoc meaning sacred force, the sacred, whatever it is that gives us life, right? But not a singular person or deity or being that necessarily created things. And so that has led me on a spiritual journey as well, is, understanding why is it that God and church and Christianity and all that is, so prevalent now, and, what is it that we believed in beforehand, and why is it demonized? And so that's been a spiritual journey as well. It's like reclaiming the love for nature that my ancestors have, water, air, all these elements that we now have been polluting,
Exactly.
that, why is it that in, Southeast Texas, you're more likely to get cancer, you're more likely to have respiratory problems, because we are killing the air and the water, So those are things that I'm trying to apply, and my now is, what my ancestors cared about was the paradise, which is all the elements around us. They give us life, right? No clean water. Can you imagine? There's people in this country who don't have clean water. To me, that's not really good.
It's not. It should be a non-negotiable.
It should be a non-negotiable, as it was. And so that's kind of what I take from my ancestral spiritual practices.
How long, you stated that right now, the person that you are in love with, that you are happy with that person, how long did it take you to get to that space?
Well, it took me a while. It took me definitely 20 plus years, to find who I was, right? I always felt, different, growing up. I always had, I was a bit more of a nerd. I was a bit more, I was bullied a lot when I was a kid. And so I think that also kind of ended up pushing me towards making a story about a character who was also bullied. But while finding in this other world, learning about these spirits and learning about his ancestry, he gets this confidence to be able to fight against the bad guys, the things that are killing the world. And so, yeah, it took me until I would say I was 24 to really, truly understand who I was, the history and all of that. And then I was finally like, okay, I know who I am, now I gotta share this thing that I share, that we all share. If you're in Mexican culture, we have these things, you know. We eat corn and beans and, you know, all of this stuff comes from our Aztec indigenous culture.
And I don't know anyone that doesn't eat corn and beans.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. You don't realize that in Mexico there's over 67 varieties of corn. There's black corn, red corn, brown corn,
What?
rainbow corn, white corn, yellow corn is the main corn used in the United States. Mexico just recently banned yellow corn from, because they don't want the, you know, genetically modified corn because it's killing a lot of the varieties that have been around for thousands of years. And so, yeah, so the Aztecs grew corn just as the Romans grew wheat and barley. And so it's like that is a staple crop that we don't realize today, you know, was thanks to the Aztecs, they grew it and perfected it.
Yes. Okay, let's talk about your book and your video game. So let's start with the book. We have The Legend of the Polo Man.
Yes.
So you talked a little bit about that. Let's go into a little bit more detail about exactly what the book is, how you came to, because you wrote the book and you're the illustrator. And before we got on the podcast, I was asking if you're like a graphic novelist or graphic artist, or maybe you're all of them.
Yeah.
Maybe you're all of them.
Yeah, most graphic novel artists tend to be a little bit of all of it because you got to know how to do design.
Okay.
Right? You have to know how to do the graphic design. But both of these two L's to a Y is because in Spanish, two L's make a Y sound. So this is pollo, which means chicken.
Oh,
So it's The Legend of Chicken Man. But I'm changing it to a Y because, again, Spanish is very specific that when there's two L's, it makes a Y sound. So for my Japanese readers or other people, I want them to see the Y easier.
So are you going to, what are you going to turn the two L's into?
A Y.
A Y.
So
Okay.
Pollo Man. Yes. So The Legend of Pollo Man. It's about a boy who becomes the chicken warrior. And it was a story, or is a story, about this young boy who lives in a small town and he loves playing marbles. But he's losing friends, he's losing family members as he's getting older. His grandfather was the one who got him into it, but his grandfather passes. And so he gets into a tussle with a bully who is, you know, messing with him, trying to take away those marbles that are dear to him because of his grandpa giving them to him. And that night, he puts the tooth that fell out under his bed or under his pillow. And what ends up happening is El Ratón de los Dientes, the Mexican tooth fairy, is a mouse.
What?
And so this mouse, I remember my mom telling me stories that the mouse would put the teeth into his own mouth so that he could have a human smile.
Okay.
And I just thought how creepy that was to imagine. And so that is what led me to creating that creepy tooth mouse here.
Okay.
And anyway, in the ending of the book, he gets tugged into this other world, and he wakes up in this other world. And here the printing got messed up, so this is one of my mess up copies. But basically, he ends up in this other world where El Ratón is actually this evil monster who kidnaps children and eats them.
What?
And so now he's going to be saved by a shapeshifter, which is an owl boy, and he's going to go on this journey where he's going to try to come back home, gain powers, and ultimately have to face that very same bully that took him to this world.
Really?
And so that's basically book one. It's going to be a full graphic novel that is going to be released in 2026 by HarperCollins. And I've been working on it for 7 years now. Mainly because I rewrote the story about 5 times because I wasn't satisfied with it, and my editors, amazing editors, have given me pointers to make it even better. And so my goal is to have one big, long, epic movie, essentially in a book, and then there's 8 more to come. So it's actually a full series that I'm planning and have been planning for that 7 years.
That is amazing.
So that's kind of why it also took so long. Was I wasn't just making one book, but I'm planning out an entire 8-book series.
Yes.
And he's going to go to these different kingdoms, all based on the actual Aztec kingdoms, and meet all the different spirits and guardians of the elements. So
You should, and I don't know what the process is to do this, Gonzalo, but you should make your series into AR books in the schools.
I would love to.
Yeah.
I would love to. I mean, luckily I'm with a publisher that, is in the schools, like Scholastic's book club and all
Yes.
that. Pollo Man is going to be a part of that.
Yes.
And so once the book is out, I think the possibilities are endless. There's already been talk about animation, like an animated series.
Right.
But all of that is a slow process, and until the book is in a physical form here,
Yes.
all of those things can't begin. But that's the future. Is I want I grew up with, Harry Potter and Naruto and all these other cool things that take place in, mainly a European world.
Yes.
Right? And so I wanted to create not, a Harry Potter world that just happens to have a Mexican character in it. No, I want a world that's based on the Aztec culture as it was.
Yes.
And the native cultures that continue to be practiced to
I
this day.
love that you are not going to whitewash this.
Yeah, to put it frankly, no, I don't want to whitewash this. This is, a story about a boy in Mexico going to Mexico's past and meeting and learning himself about his past, and through that gaining those powers.
Okay, let's talk about the game. Not only did you do a book, you did a game as well.
Yeah, so this is Nawali, which means shapeshifter or sorcerer. In Aztec culture, and even to this day, the Nawali are shapeshifters. So people who can shapeshift into wolves and birds and
Okay.
practice magic, animal magic. And so it was believed that we all had a tonali, which is our sort of like a horoscope. We're all born with a nawal, which is our spirit animal. So there are 20 different signs that one can be born under, just like, Scorpio and all that.
Yes.
Well,
Is this the origin of that?
Yes.
What?
So we all have our own horoscope in Aztec culture. These are the 20 different signs that you can be born under. So snake, caiman, reed, quake, water. So animals and elements. These were essentially 20 significant elements that were important to the culture. And depending on the one that you were born under, you may have some of those qualities. And so if you were born on monkey, your spirit animal might be the monkey, and you tend to be silly and a partier. And so the goal was to create a game where you have these different creatures that have the symbols, and each symbol has like a unique power. So if you have the eagle, you can fly to the other lane to attack your opponent. Or if you have the jaguar can move to pounce on the opponents. So they're all thematically themed around those abilities, because again, those are 20 important symbols. But the characters are all based on actual spirits and animals that were important and are important to Aztec culture. And they're all named in Nahuatl, which is the native language of central Mexico, or one of, and what the Aztecs spoke. So Huexolotl, that's the name of Turkey. And Huexolotl means great monster.
Wow.
So they called the turkey the great monster because it was this ugly, creepy bird that lived in the forest.
Yes.
We eat turkeys every Thanksgiving
We do.
in the United States, but people don't realize turkeys are native to Mexico.
Are they?
Yes, turkeys are native to Mexico.
Right.
Turkey was the bird that Aztecs ate, not chickens. Chickens came from Spain. Chickens came from across the sea.
Okay.
Goats, horses, pigs, all of those farm animals came from Spain or Britain.
Wow.
Cows.
Yes.
We didn't eat cheese. We didn't have cows. And so learning about all these different things, it's like we eat chicken every day in modern U.S., but people didn't realize we used to eat turkeys all the time. And part of colonization was actually killing or removing a lot of the foods that the people ate. So that's why we eat more chickens.
Yes.
They actually killed off a lot of the turkeys, and Native Americans in the United States and in Mexico were essentially forced to switch over to chickens.
Yes.
And so in this card game, like I said, these are all spirits. You also have items. So this is the makwawik, which means the wooden hand.
It looks like a paddle.
It looks like a paddle, and it's actually a wooden beam with obsidian blades on the sides.
Oh, that hurts.
And obsidian is actually the sharpest stone in the world. Surgeons use obsidian tip scalpels for surgeries because it is one of the sharpest. It can be as sharp as like one molecule, which is, essentially microscopically short.
Yes.
So it can slice you very easily, and this was what was used in war. So we didn't use, iron and steel. They didn't have that technology, the furnace, to create iron and steel, but they also didn't have the deposits of iron and steel in that area to come up with that. So they used obsidian.
So how would they get it?
They nap it. So you get obsidian stone and you nap it. Basically, you break chunks off until it just turns into basically just a really sharp edge. And they nap the blades, and then they insert them, and then they use glue such as bat poop and other saps from trees that would become just hardened glue. And so they would create these weapons that were, very, very dangerous.
Man, so resourceful.
Yeah, exactly. Very resourceful. Very resourceful. Another interesting thing that I find intriguing is they used an armor. A lot of people believe that Aztecs, were just in loincloths all the time, but that's not true. They actually had armor. The Ixcawipili was actually a quilted cotton armor that was about 1 inch thick, and it was brined. So they would leave it with salt water, and then they would let it dry and harden in the sun. And that would make the armor so tough that arrows couldn't even pass through it. And so basically, they were very resourceful without having, iron and all these other industrial things to create armor and weapons for war, which unfortunately is a thing that every culture has done.
Absolutely. It's like the first bulletproof vest.
It 100% is, actually. This is actually considered to have influenced the modern bulletproof vest.
I can see that.
So that is one of the many, many things that Aztec culture we have today is because of these technologies and insight and wisdom. Plants. Plant medicine. The Aztecs were very much known for plant medicine. In fact, we had the most documented plant medicine in the world at the time when the Spanish arrived. So much so that the doctors, when Spanish people were hurt, they wanted to go to a native doctor because the native doctors just had that much more intuition and knowledge of the plants for medicine.
Yes.
Back in 1500s. And so a lot of people don't realize a lot of flowers, perfumes, a lot of medicine comes from native herbology. And there are, hundreds of different plants with different properties that, you may even find in your backyard that you didn't realize actually has medical properties.
Yes. Wow, we've gotten so much from the Aztec culture and just did not realize it because it's not taught. Just like you said, it's not taught in the schools.
Yes, exactly. It's not taught in the schools. And the reality of it is, schools just don't really teach a lot about native cultures.
They do not.
And because it, unfortunately when an empire, takes over an area, they really want to focus on what they're doing best and push out the native cultures. And this isn't just in the United States. This isn't just in Mexico. This is just a worldwide problem. An empire grows, they take over an area, and they push out the native people. Prior to the 1500s, from Canada to Mexico, it was native people. And it wasn't until the 1500s that European people arrived and African people arrived because of the Europeans pulling them in here. And so nowadays, most people don't even realize that native cultures, even in the United States, still exist. They're just unfortunately segregated into small reservations.
Right.
Their resources were taken. And a lot of people are afraid to talk about that. They fear, and a lot of people hate thinking about that, because maybe there's guilt and all this other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But I think truth is the most important thing.
It is.
And to teach it is the best thing that we can do for anyone, right?
Yes.
Whether you are, European or Black or Mexican, learning about where we're standing
Mm-hmm.
and who stood here before us
And how we got to where we
and
are
how we
now.
got to where we are now will open up your mind in a different way.
Yes. And every country has its sin and has its problems.
Correct.
And one of the countries, Germany, they do a great job of teaching
Yes.
about Hitler and everything that he did in that country, and as it spread to other countries. They're doing an excellent job. They teach it from, I want to say, like elementary school
Correct.
on, for the exact same reason that you just said: education, knowledge. This is where we were, so we don't repeat this.
Correct.
Look at where we are now.
Correct.
I would assume that maybe there's other countries that do that, but the only one that I've researched and found was Germany, that does such an excellent job of
Right.
that.
And that's an unfortunate part of Mexico, was that for a long time, my parents didn't learn anything about
Mm-hmm.
this, because for a long time the educational system was very focused on, like I said, Spanish, Hispanic culture.
Yes.
Even to this day, there are schools who will, punish the kid in Mexico for speaking their native tongue. So, kids from Oaxaca or kids from, a Nahua group will go into the classroom, and if they're caught speaking Nahuatl or caught speaking Purepecha, which
Mhm.
is another native language, they'll make fun of them, they'll, get in trouble, they'll be told, don't speak that. And so that is still happening to this day. Imagine 300 years ago. People were getting literally beaten to death because of that. People were getting, there's unfortunately in Canada found, lots of Catholic schools where a lot of Native people were sent to boarding schools and forced to learn English, forced to dress as a European, and there are bones of dead children under those schools. Hundreds of dead children. And
That's
the last
horrible.
one that was closed was in 1990, I believe.
We
And
both
so-
were alive.
We both were alive when people were going through this. And so that is something that, for me, is the most important, is to, regardless of your religious, spiritual beliefs, I would believe any institution who has harmed children should be, victimized or addressed.
Mhm.
That you should address, like, this was not okay. No religion should do this to
Absolutely.
anyone in the world.
Absolutely.
And so, and unfortunately, because, religion is a big part of people's culture, it can be hard to have that conversation because you don't want to offend anyone, right? And by no means do I try to, tell anyone what they should believe. My only goal is the truth, because the truth brings us, I think for me, through truth, I found to be able to find more love. I found to, every culture, including Catholic people or Christian people or any people of any demographic, has been oppressed at some point. And the goal is just to understand the truths and see how we can be better, how everyone can coexist.
Yes.
Right? I should be able to practice and to believe and to teach about my native Aztec culture, and without being demonized or told that, oh, I'm going to start sacrificing children.
Yes.
Or that, I'm summoning spirits and the devil is coming. And, I've had a lot of that. Surprisingly, I've had a lot of people.
People say that to you?
Oh, yeah. People
I
have,
thought you were just making up stuff.
Oh, no. Actually, we were on the Channel 12 News 2 years ago, and there was a lady on Facebook who wrote, "This is an evil game. They said they're drawing and summoning spirits, and the Aztecs are evil." And I just simply said, "Ma'am, this is just a card game," because that is what it is. This is a card game. And so that's been the main issue, is even though I'm doing my best to be, teaching it in a positive light,
Mhm.
there's still people who unfortunately just don't know enough.
Which goes back to the educational piece.
Exactly.
It's so needed.
Exactly. When you hear the word Aztec, what is the first thing you picture? You picture, well, hopefully not you, but like people tend to picture some bloody sacrifice. That's been sort of the stereotype, is that Aztecs sacrificed humans. And that was used even then to justify colonizing them, to justify burning them alive. I would say there's no justification for burning anyone alive, right?
Ever.
But even to this day, there are people online especially who will say, I'm glad that they were burned alive. Or I'm glad that we don't believe in that stuff anymore. Without realizing that the reason they believe what they do now is because we were forced. There wasn't a choice. And then there are some people who have choice, and maybe they don't believe that everyone should have been killed and burned.
Yes.
But that is sort of the stereotype that I'm trying to remove, is that Native people, Tenochtitlan was the largest city in the world at the time. One of the largest cities, larger than London, larger than Madrid, largest city in the world at the time. I would say that is a pretty successful civilization.
Yes, it is.
Millions of people being fed every day, 1,000 janitors employed by the city to clean the streets. Wouldn't that be great if our local government did that for us?
Yeah.
All these technologies, latrines, set up. They had public bathrooms set up all along the highway for if anyone needed to use the restroom. They had chinampas, which were the floating gardens. They used the lake to grow food, because that actually is a very productive way of growing food, because you have the garden being fed water from the very lake itself.
Yes.
A lot of countries and cultures and scientists are looking into these ways of growing food, because as we're developing, as things are getting tighter in our country, people are looking at other solutions for growing food and doing better. And so there's hundreds of things that, were what you would say civilized. And to say any one culture was uncivilized is to be narrow-minded.
Very much.
I would say all cultures have something good and also bad. There is no...
Which is the human,
It's
the
a human...
humanistic...
It is.
Yes.
Exactly. And so that's my goal, is to teach people the side of the culture that doesn't get talked about. You can read history books about ritual sacrifice, which was done, but that wasn't neighbors killing each other. That was state-sponsored public execution.
Yes.
State-sponsored public execution, which still happens to this day.
Does it?
In the state-sponsored executions
Oh,
in
yes.
other countries.
Yes.
And yeah.
Yes, it does.
Not as glorified as it was. So that was what was happening in that time all around the world. State-sponsored execution. People were getting in Europe. They were being put on wooden bars in front of the public to be stoned to death.
Yes.
So that is something to remember, is that every state, every government can do bad for its people. But the people are not to blame for what the state and government does, right? I believe majority of people are good and try to do good, and it is our leaders who should be scrutinized for doing bad things for the people.
Yes.
Right? So because there was some leader who said, I want this state ritual every month, that doesn't mean that Aztecs, that the mother who was feeding her child, or the father who was teaching his kid how to read, had any sort of evil intentions inside.
Wow. I've learned so much. And it hasn't even been an hour yet. Wow, this is amazing. Okay, so if people want to purchase the game, the
Yes.
book that's coming up in 2026,
Yes.
Or even, I guess, chapter 1, we can call.
Unfortunately, this cannot be sold or printed anymore. Only the people who purchased it 7 years ago.
Has it. Okay.
But the game.
The game. So if people want to purchase the game, how can they do that?
Nawali.com.
And how do you spell that?
Nawalli.
Okay.
Nawali.com. We have, merchandise. We have stickers. We have shirts. We have all sorts of other cool merchandise. But yes, that is where you can get the game. It's just now been released to be available. We had a Kickstarter earlier this year, and we raised $30,000
Really?
of sales, and that was what allowed us to do our print run. So thank you to everyone who all the 500 people who backed our game.
Yes, congratulations. That's amazing.
Thank you.
That is amazing. Okay, so let's learn a little bit about the Aztec culture, a little bit more. Because you have been so great in explaining. I'm assuming that the Aztec culture has ended, or is it still around?
So it is the Nahua culture, the people who call themselves Nahua, the Maya culture, all these native cultures still exist.
Okay.
There are still Nahua people in Mexico who continue to speak Nahua, who continue to practice and eat Nahua foods. The Aztecs is kind of a bloated word because it's used to just speak about everything as a whole. But if we want to sort of give you like a quick, synopsis of the history, before there was anything, the Aztecs in the central Mexico, there was other people, the Otomi, the Chichimeca.
So this
the
would be
Tolteca.
another tribe.
Yeah, exactly. With their own cities, their own culture, everything. There was 7 Nahua tribes that came from Aslan. Luckily, we have 13 books out of thousands that were burned. We only have about 13 that are still here because they were considered demonic or of the devil. And I think that speaks to what's happening today in America. There are a lot of book burnings actually happening, or book banning.
Book bannings.
And this is just history repeating itself. So there were 7 Nahua tribes that are considered to have been in the southwest of what we call the U.S. today. They traveled and migrated to central Mexico. These 7 people around a lake was where they settled. And they built 7 different kingdoms. And the leaders of those kingdoms began fighting with each other to see who would rule them all. The Aztecs was actually a triple alliance between 3 different city-states.
Which means?
Which means 3 kingdoms allied together. Kind of like the United States is an alliance of 50 states.
Right.
That was an alliance of 3.
Okay.
These 3 became the triple alliance. But eventually they used, war and began to conquer everyone else. The Mexica being the central power, the Mexica, they created a war culture where war was recognized in, public service. Warriors were sort of, the top tier of the culture. And that kind of happens everywhere. The Romans, right? The warriors became the most powerful, and what did they do? They conquered everyone around them. And so at some point in 1492, Columbus arrived from Europe and saw that there was a country on the side. Went back, told everyone. The Spanish arrived in 1519 on the side of Mexico. And they first met with the Maya people. And when they met the Maya people, they read a document to them that was written by the Pope of the Catholic Church that gave them the right to murder, enslave all the women, all the children, if they did not comply with what they wanted.
And I'm assuming that those tribe men and women had no idea what they were reading.
That is the funny part, that they had no idea what they were reading. They read it to them in Spanish and began this battle with them. The Spanish, after fighting with the Maya, learned about the Aztec, that nucleus, the Aztec Empire, the greatest city in the world, they called it. On their travel there, they met the Tlaxcala. The Tlaxcala, or Tlaxcaltecs, were the rivals of the Aztecs. They hated the Aztecs.
Wow.
The Aztecs hated them. Why did they hate the Aztecs? Because the Aztecs wouldn't give them salt. That was one of the big reasons. the Aztecs had the power, they had the Salt Lake,
Mm-hmm.
and they didn't give them salt. So what did they do? They found a salt that is native to the Tlaxcala region in the rocks. It's like a rock salt that you find in the ground.
Wow.
Well, anyway, the Spanish arrived, they had a battle,
Mm-hmm.
and they eventually were like, wow, these people on giant deer with metal armor. They thought of the horses as giant deer because they had never seen a horse before.
Wow.
And so, written down in the books, Hernan Cortés, leader of the conquistadors,
Mm-hmm.
he wrote a diary. And you can read this diary. And you can learn from his perspective what it was like to meet the Aztecs. And he, says they were great in many ways. But obviously he had his own intentions. So what happened? They allied with the Tlaxcaltecs. Together with the Tlaxcaltecs, they rounded up everyone else who was being taxed by the Aztecs, and they sieged the city. They cut off the water source from the city, which was in the island,
Mm-hmm.
and it had aqueducts that connected to the island to provide fresh water. They sieged the city for 30 days, or 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
And in that time, people starved to death.
That's horrible.
People were dehydrated to death. And because they had had contact, smallpox began to run rampant.
Yes.
And even one of the Catholic priests wrote that bodies were piled like flies on, manure.
And could you imagine the smell?
And can you imagine the smell? And that city, all of that alliance of the Spanish and the Tlaxcala and other native groups attacked the city, murdered as many people. It's a genocide. It was over 20,000 Mexicans died that day on the siege. Well, anyway, they conquered the city. They conquered the king Cuauhtemoc, the last king of Tenochtitlan. And it quickly would become New Spain. They would call it New Spain. And now the Tlaxcaltecs would have in this new world, the power. That's what the Tlaxcaltecs wanted,
Yeah.
There's this new power coming in. They were now treated better than the other people, right? But unfortunately, they didn't realize that the Spanish would put them under them. And if so you were native, the Spanish lords would take your land, and now you work for him on your land. And they were beaten. They were tortured. They were killed for being native. And this is something that has happened all over the world to different native peoples.
Yes.
But this is specifically what happened to the Mexican people. If you were caught worshiping the sun, the water, the wind, you were going to be either criminalized or put to death because that was pagan. You maybe have heard of Our Lady of Guadalupe.
Yes.
So Our Lady of Guadalupe is a Mexican icon. And what people don't know is, the story of Lady of Guadalupe is told that there was a man named Juan Diego who was a native man who went to the hill of Tepeyacac. And in 1531, he supposedly saw the Virgin Mary appear and told him to build her chapel there. And to prove that she was there, he would have to come with her with a cloak full of roses. And then her image appeared on the cloak.
Yes.
However, I like to be factual. Well, the image on the cloak was drawn in a European style with European paints. And so it is also the spot where our mother Cihuacuatl, meaning lady snake or mother snake, because the earth, like a snake, sheds its skin every year. So the earth was associated with snakes in a good way. Unlike in European mythology, the snake tends to be bad.
Yes.
And so it may have been a ploy by the Catholic Church to get this native man to convert his fellow men by creating this spectacle. And to this day, they have the cloak.
Yes, they do.
And it is believed that this miracle happened. But from my research, that was European paints, that was European style. So it was a ploy by the Catholic Church.
So you don't think that it happened?
It did not happen.
Okay.
Yeah. Just from a science rational base, it was painted, the style and the colors, the pigments that were used.
Yes.
And I think they've even analyzed it and have proven that. But it, again, is a ploy that was used to turn Mexico from 100% native worshiper to 70% Catholic. And to this day, it continues.
I was going to say that. To this, so many years later.
And people will create statues to honor
They
Cihuacuat.
do?
But guess what happens when you put them out there? The very same Catholic Mexican people attack and protest because these are demonic, these are pagan. And so there's this cultural war between native Mexicans who have continued to practice those traditions, native Mexicans who are reclaiming those native traditions, versus people who are so devoted to the Catholic religion that they will ostracize it, that they will attack it. And so for me, it's not about necessarily destroying or taking away, it's about allowing both to coexist.
Which there's enough space for
There's
both,
enough space.
for both to coexist.
Exactly. And so that is essentially a quick history of how things happened.
Yes.
The Aztecs arrived, the Spanish arrived, they made friends, they took over the city, but then the Spanish having, guns, which it's like when you have a gun and no one else has guns, you win.
Yes. And you don't know what a gun is.
Exactly. You win. And here we are, 300 years later, it took until 1830 to say, you know what, we deserve rights.
Yeah.
And you shouldn't just have more rights because you're full-blood Spanish.
Yeah.
And so they were kicked out, and then another 70 years of war until the first president of Mexico was in the 1900s, early 1900s. Imagine that. So there has been history that people don't know about. And I think once you learn about it, it just makes you appreciate Mexican culture more. Tortillas, frijoles, all the foods that we eat today, majority of people love Mexican food.
Yes.
And all of those were created and cooked by native people for the longest time. And I'm grateful I was able to grow up with that.
Right.
Because there are other people who maybe immigrate here and have no connection to their ancestry. So for me, it was just like bliss. I finally understand my history and I can teach it, hopefully.
Right.
And so, I think one of the greatest things I learned was from the philosopher Netzahualcoyotl, 1471. He was the king of Texcoco, one of the kings of the Triple Alliance, and he said, whether it be made of gold, it will break. Whether it be a feather of Quetzal, it will break. Quetzal being this beautiful bird. Not forever on this earth, only a little while here. He understood existence beyond the belief of you die, you go to the good place or the bad place. He believed that it doesn't matter how rich you are, you will die, and you will go to the place of rest.
Yes.
But he said smell the flowers because they are the truest thing in the world. Because they are just true. They're just beautiful and true. If you slip, if you fall, get back up and drink your chocolate. Because to him, the pleasures of life, flowers, chocolate, these things that we take for granted, are what we have in this life. So, if you fall, get back up and drink your chocolate.
Yes.
And so that philosophy is not taught. Nobody even realizes that we had a philosopher in Mexico.
No. And they're definitely not teaching about stop and smell the flowers and enjoy the smaller things.
Yes.
They teach riches and the more money
The more
things you have,
the better
off you are. And that's the complete opposite.
It's the complete opposite. It just plays into the system for you to work harder to believe you can reach that. And I'll tell you, I've been working hard as I can, and it's been very hard to even reach, a stable income.
Yeah.
And so, but I'm going to keep trying,
Yes.
because I see other people do it, and that inspires me that, if someone else can do it, even though I didn't have, a financial upbringing, my parents, they were farmers, they didn't go to college. I was the first to go to college. I was the first to be born here.
Wow.
I was the first to learn English. I was the first of many things,
Yes.
and I wanted to take the American dream that they essentially wanted to provide me to do this. This is what United States provides, this land of opportunity.
Yes.
And so, as an immigrant, my parents being immigrants, I want to show that, immigrants provide everything for this country. Because
Yes.
every single person was an immigrant at some point, or comes from immigrants.
That needs to
Other
be taught.
than the native people who are already
Other
here.
than the native, yes. That
Those-
needs to be taught.
Exactly. And so, yeah, my goal is just to share all of this, lore that I've learned and
Yes.
culture, and just teach through my work.
Right. And this podcast has been so amazing. And it's one of the reasons I love doing this podcast, because I get to learn. I'm like the consummate learner. Like, I'm always wanting to learn, just
Yes.
different things. And you have been teaching.
Thank you.
You have been teaching, and I know, and I'm asking on the podcast, whenever your book comes out in 2026, I would love to have you back on.
I would be
To talk about
grateful
that
to be
book.
on, and I'll be
Yes.
happy to be here.
Thank you so much. Now, I feel like you've answered the question throughout the hour that we've been talking already, but I definitely want to ask you directly, what is your intention in this space of the book, the video game, and things like that?
Pokemon,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Everyone knows Pokemon.
Yes.
Pokemon was an idea by an amazing designer in Japan who liked collecting bugs, and he wanted to create a game where you trade little critters.
What? Is that what Pokemon is about?
That's basically what happened. But
I
then
did not know
eventually,
that.
when they started the game, they decided, well, instead of just bugs, let's do monsters and all sorts of creatures. The game came out in 1996, and I was born, around that time, and that was kind of my childhood. And now it's the most profitable media franchise on Earth.
Really?
Yes.
Wow. I was thinking maybe Harry Potter.
No. It is the most profitable media in the world. There's video games, cartoons, card
It
games,
is.
shirts, clothes.
It is.
Every object you can think of, Pokemon has slapped themselves on it. My goal is to do that for Aztec culture, for Mexican culture, for the Mexican people with our culture that grew up, because Pokemon has its roots in Japanese culture.
Yes.
Right? The games, you travel in a Japanese-inspired world. Then they actually moved on and did one where it's like inspired by Polynesian islands. Then they did one where it's inspired by America, by New York, Paris.
Oh, that's right. You're right. Yes.
So they've done all these other ones, but they haven't done Mexico. And so it's like, that's kind of a problem in the gaming spaces. Mexico
That is a problem.
just doesn't get that representation. One, because there's just a lack of knowledge about what Mexico is, what cultures are there, because they don't have that native culture. Whereas Japan grew up with its native cultures never really being colonized. And so my goal is basically to provide the sort of the Marvel universe for Aztec Mexican culture. I want little Mexican kids to feel like they can also be a warrior and a sorcerer without having to learn this other culture that they don't know anything about. It's like, why can't we have our own? Because we did.
Yes.
And so that's my goal, is to just provide that, and hopefully in doing that, I'll be able to financially sustain myself.
Yes.
So that I can just keep creating.
And I know you're creating, and the game seems amazing. The book, even this book, The Legend of the Polar Man, seems amazing. But I feel like it's just, you're educating. through these things. You're just educating.
Right. I learned English by playing Pokemon.
Mm-hmm.
By playing the Pokemon game, I learned, the names of the characters were very like Charizard. It's like
Yes.
Char, Fire, Zard, Lizard, Fire Lizard, right?
Yes.
And so I learned words that I didn't know about in English. And so my English got better because I played a video game. And so my goal is through gaming, through play, you learn, right? That's literally how everyone learns, right? You're a kid, you get a toy car or toy hammer or
Yes.
toy cooking, right? You try to learn through play.
Yes.
Well, what if everything in the game is just based around this culture? Then you're just going to learn and play it,
You are.
right? Everyone knows Pikachu, but no one knows Donatu, the sun, the shining one, is what the name means. And so those words, hopefully, you'll just learn because you're playing the game and you're having fun.
Yes.
That's my priority, is fun.
Mhm.
I don't want this to be educational first, then fun, because then it feels preachy. It can be boring if you approach it that way. This is fun first. I think regardless of what cultural background you have, people have enjoyed what I made. There's people in Germany who are in love with my game. There are people in Korea who are telling me how much they love my game.
Yeah.
Because people just love learning.
Yes.
And so I just want to provide that, be the one that what I'm showing you is accurate. Because that's the other part. There's not enough accurate stuff out there.
Yes.
So when we do get something, it tends to not be accurate. And so that's the second degree of the problem. So yeah, I want to be that place. I want to be the person to come to for cool books and games based on this awesome culture that we can all learn from.
Yes. Wow. This has been so good. Like, I cannot even convey. This has been so good.
Thank you.
Okay, my final question for you is, who do you think would make a great guest on the podcast, but you have to help me get them on?
Yes. Okay. I think Grace Chadwick would be a great person to have on. She, not just because she's my partner, but because she is a local artist who has also worked with me on all these projects, but as well has worked on her own projects. And she's had her own journey dealing with mental health. And so her work revolves around mental health and healing from trauma, which is something that a lot of people don't seek out, is healing after traumatic events from childhood. And so I feel like her work is very vulnerable and allows people to learn and deal with, trauma. And I think that's been a really positive thing, even for me. I've learned so much about, dealing with my emotions and dealing with myself. So I think she would be an amazing person to have, and I'll make sure she comes up here.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for saying yes to this podcast. I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. I'm honored to just be able to share this, because at the end of the day, I just love it.
And I can tell, like, that clearly comes across, and I'm sure the listeners and the visitors, the listeners and the viewers will be able to feel your passion for what it is you're doing. Yes.
Yeah, no, I hope so. Yeah, it's all about love, for the culture. And I think when you find something you love, it just happens.
Naturally. You don't have to fake it.
Exactly. So that's what I tell everyone is follow what you love. It was very hard being a first generation and deciding going art route. There's a lot of, doubt about, or how you're going to financially sustain yourself. How is this going to be a proper career? And so I've just had to work that much harder to make sure it works.
Yes.
And so, but it's been a great journey. So, I always tell people, follow what you love and just find people who love you enough to help.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for tuning in, and thank you again so much for being here. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
You guys can get Mr. Alvarez's podcast on YouTube and Apple Podcasts, along with all of my other episodes. And don't forget, you always have time to listen and learn on the go.
Come on, let's go on a journey. Sit back, buckle up, enjoy the ride.